A 13-year-old boy, driven by love for his sick mother, starts a humble lemonade stand to help save her. But one life-altering day, his journey takes a shocking turn, unraveling a tale of resilience, courage, and unimaginable twists. What happens next will leave you breathless. 13-year-old Malcolm stood on the cracked sidewalk outside his small, worn-down house in a quiet corner of a bustling city. The sun was high in the sky, beating down on the neighborhood, as beads of sweat rolled down his dark brow. His eyes, sharp and full of determination, scanned the street. His lemonade stand, a simple wooden table with a handmade sign that read, "Fresh lemonade, $1, stood beside him. This wasn't just any lemonade stand. For Malcolm, it was his lifeline, a desperate attempt to raise money for the woman who meant the world to him, his mother, Clara. Malcolm's life had been a series of uphill battles. His father, a hard-working mechanic, had passed away in a tragic accident when Malcolm was just 5 years old. That loss left a void in their lives, and a mountain of bills that Clara struggled to handle alone. But Clara was a fighter. She raised Malcolm with unwavering love, teaching him the values of hard work, honesty, and dignity. Yet life had dealt them another cruel hand. Clara had been diagnosed with cancer a year ago, and their savings, already stretched thin, had vanished under the weight of medical expenses. Malcolm had watched her grow weaker each day, her once radiant smile dimmed by pain and exhaustion. When Malcolm asked their relatives for help, their responses were heartbreaking. They offered excuses or outright refused. "We have our own families to take care of," they'd say, or, "We just don't have the money right now." Some didn't even bother to respond. The rejection stung deeply, but it also fueled Malcolm's determination. One evening, as Clara lay asleep, Malcolm sat in their tiny living room, staring at the few coins he had saved in a jar labeled Mom's Fund. The weight of the situation crushed him, but Malcolm wasn't one to give up. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "Malcolm, never beg. If you need something, work for it, no matter how hard it gets." The next morning, Malcolm had an idea. If no one was going to help, he'd find a way to help his mother himself. He'd open a lemonade stand. He knew it wasn't much, but it was something. Armed with his determination and the small amount of money he had, Malcolm bought lemons, sugar, and paper cups. He borrowed an old table from their shed and crafted a sign from a cardboard box. Now, as he stood behind the table, the smell of fresh lemons wafting through the air, Malcolm greeted every passerby with a smile and a heartfelt pitch. "Fresh lemonade, just $1. All proceeds go to help my mom." Some people stopped, drawn by his sincerity. They bought a cup, asked about his mother, and left with a mix of admiration and sympathy. Others passed by without so much as a glance. But Malcolm didn't mind. Each dollar he earned felt like a victory. Malcolm's lemonade stand became a fixture in the neighborhood. Day after day, he stood on that corner, rain or shine, selling lemonade with a passion that went beyond his years. His small hands grew skilled at squeezing lemons, mixing the perfect ratio of sugar to water, and keeping his stand spotless. People began to notice him. Some were regulars who stopped by daily, praising his determination. Others were curious strangers who couldn't resist the charm of the young boy working tirelessly under the sun. "Is it really for your mom?" a man in a business suit asked one afternoon, his tone skeptical. "Yes, sir," Malcolm replied earnestly. "My mom's sick, and I'm trying to save for her treatment. Every dollar helps." The man looked at Malcolm for a long moment before pulling out a $5 bill. "Keep the change, kid," he said, taking a cup of lemonade. "Thank you," Malcolm said with a wide grin, his spirits lifting. Each day was a new challenge. Some days were slow, and Malcolm would barely make enough to cover the cost of supplies. On others, kind strangers left him tips, and he'd return home with enough to make a small deposit into his mom's fund jar. Word about Malcolm's lemonade stand spread. A few neighbors started sharing his story on social media, posting pictures of the determined boy selling lemonade with a sign that read, "Help save my mom." His story resonated with many, and people from other neighborhoods began driving over to buy a cup of lemonade or simply to donate. One day, an older woman stopped by. Her hair was silver, and she leaned on a cane as she approached. "You remind me of my grandson," she said, handing Malcolm a $10 bill. "He's always looking out for others just like you. Bless you, child." "Thank you, ma'am," Malcolm said, his chest swelling with gratitude. As the weeks turned into months, Malcolm's name became synonymous with hard work and hope. People admired him, but admiration didn't pay the bills. The money he earned helped cover day-to-day expenses and some of his mother's medication, but it wasn't nearly enough to tackle her mounting medical bills. One afternoon, Malcolm returned home after a long day at the stand. He found Clara sitting on the couch, looking weaker than ever. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the glass of water on the table. "Mom," Malcolm said, setting down his supplies. "Are you feeling okay? Did you eat today?" Clara gave him a tired smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart, just a little tired." But Malcolm knew better. The weight of her illness was taking its toll, and it terrified him. That night, he sat by her bedside, watching her sleep. Tears filled his eyes as he thought about how much he missed her laughter, her energy, and the warmth she used to radiate. "I'm not giving up, Mom," he whispered. "I'll figure it out, I promise." The next morning, Malcolm made a decision. He needed to take his efforts to the next level. He couldn't keep up with just a lemonade stand, not with the kind of money they needed for Clara's treatment. Malcolm sat at the small, rickety kitchen table with his head in his hands, staring at the few crumpled bills and coins he'd earned that day. The Mom's Fund jar sat in front of him, barely half full despite months of effort. The reality hit him hard. No matter how much lemonade he sold, it would take years to save enough for Clara's treatment, and time wasn't on their side. The thought of his mother suffering tore at him. He needed a bigger plan, something that would bring in the kind of money they desperately needed. He stayed up late that night, sketching out ideas in a spiral notebook. Selling baked goods? Too expensive. A car wash? He didn't have the resources. Expanding the lemonade stand? Maybe, but he needed more traffic. The next morning, Malcolm approached the local grocery store manager, Mr. Perry, who had always been kind to him. "Mr. Perry," Malcolm began nervously, clutching the straps of his worn backpack, "I was wondering if I could set up my lemonade stand outside your store. More people come here, and I think I could sell more." Mr. Perry looked at him thoughtfully. "You're a hard-working kid, Malcolm. I've seen how much this means to you. Tell you what, I'll let you set up your stand here on weekends when we're busiest. Just make sure to keep the area clean, all right?" Malcolm's face lit up. "Thank you so much, sir. I promise I'll keep it spotless." By the weekend, Malcolm had moved his stand to the grocery store's entrance. Business picked up immediately. Shoppers stopped to buy lemonade on their way in and out, and Malcolm's earnings doubled. He reinvested the money into better signage and larger cups. He even added flavors like strawberry and mint, drawing more customers. But success brought challenges. One afternoon, two boys from his neighborhood approached his stand, their expressions sour. They were older than Malcolm, their shadows looming over him. "You think you're better than everyone just 'cause you're on the news?" one of them sneered. "I'm just trying to help my mom," Malcolm said, keeping his tone even. The other boy kicked the leg of his stand, causing the jars to rattle. "Well, we don't like you getting all this attention. Give us your money or we'll mess up your little stand." Malcolm's heart pounded. He couldn't afford to lose what little he'd earned, but he also couldn't fight them off. Just as the boys reached for the jar, an elderly shopper stepped out of the store. "Hey," she shouted, her voice firm. "Leave him alone." The boys froze, muttered something under their breath, and ran off. The woman turned to Malcolm, her kind eyes full of concern. "Are you all right, dear?" Malcolm nodded, though his hands were still shaking. "Thank you, ma'am. I didn't know what to do." She smiled gently. "You're doing something good, young man. Don't let anyone scare you away from it." The encounter shook Malcolm, but also strengthened his resolve. He added a small lockbox to his setup to keep his earnings safe and started staying more vigilant. His hard work continued to pay off, but the closer he got to his goal, the heavier his mother's medical expenses became. It felt like he was running on a treadmill, no closer to the finish line. Then, one fateful day, everything changed. It was a sunny afternoon, and Malcolm was setting up his stand when a sleek black SUV pulled into the parking lot. It wasn't unusual for fancy cars to stop by the grocery store, but something about this one felt different. The windows were tinted, and it idled for a moment before slowly pulling up near Malcolm's stand. The passenger side window rolled down, revealing a man in a crisp suit and sunglasses. His face was unreadable, but his gaze locked onto Malcolm. "Hey, kid," he said, his voice deep and commanding. "You're the lemonade boy everyone's talking about, huh?" Malcolm nodded cautiously. "Yes, sir. Would you like some lemonade?" The man smirked but didn't answer. Instead, he stepped out of the car and approached the stand. His presence was intimidating, and Malcolm's stomach tightened. Before he could react, two more men emerged from the SUV and flanked the suited man. "Why don't you come with us?" the man said, his tone casual but firm. Malcolm's heart raced. I can't leave my stand," he stammered. One of the other men grabbed Malcolm by the arm. "We insist," he said, his grip tightening. Fear shot through Malcolm like electricity. "Let me go!" he shouted, but his cries were drowned out by the roar of the SUV's engine as they shoved him inside and sped off. The SUV roared through the streets, its engine growling like a predator on the hunt. Malcolm sat pressed against the cold leather seat, his small frame dwarfed by the three imposing figures surrounding him. The tinted windows offered no clues to his whereabouts, only intensifying his rising panic. His heart raced so violently he thought it might burst. He fought the urge to cry, forcing himself to appear strong even though fear clawed at his insides. "What do you want from me?" Malcolm demanded, his voice quivering but resolute. The man in the suit seated across from him leaned forward with a smirk. His mirrored sunglasses reflected Malcolm's terrified face, distorting it further. "Relax, kid," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "We're just going for a little ride." The man's words did little to ease Malcolm's anxiety. Beside him, a burly man built like a linebacker cracked his knuckles, the sound loud and menacing in the confined space. "Keep your mouth shut, and maybe you'll get through this in one piece," he growled, his deep voice vibrating through the air. Malcolm's hands clenched into fists as he stared at his sneakers. He tried to focus, to think of some kind of plan, but the terror kept clouding his thoughts. What could they possibly want with him? He had nothing. No money, no valuables, no connections. His mother needed him, and the thought of her waiting for him at home, sick and fragile, fueled his resolve. "This has to be a mistake," he tried again, his voice steadying just slightly. "You've got the wrong kid. I don't have anything you want." The suited man leaned back and chuckled as if Malcolm's protests amused him. "Oh, you've got something we want, all right," he said cryptically, not elaborating further. The SUV made a sharp turn off the main road, jolting Malcolm in his seat. He peered through the faint sliver of visibility near the edge of the tinted glass, his stomach twisting as the bustling sounds of the city faded into an unnerving silence. They were in the middle of nowhere now, the hum of traffic replaced by the crunch of gravel and the rustling of leaves. The narrow dirt path they traveled wound through dense trees, their skeletal branches stretching like claws into the twilight sky. Shadows danced eerily in the dim light, and Malcolm felt the oppressive weight of isolation. "Where are you taking me?" he asked again, his voice barely more than a whisper. The linebacker sneered, his eyes narrowing. "Didn't I tell you to shut it?" Malcolm bit his lip, trying to suppress the tremor in his chest. He couldn't afford to break down now. Every time he shifted even slightly, he felt the men's piercing gazes lock onto him, like predators waiting for a wrong move. The SUV came to a halt, the sudden stop jarring Malcolm forward. Outside, the oppressive silence deepened, broken only by the sound of the engine idling. He was yanked out of the vehicle by his arm, the rough grip bruising his skin. His sneakers scraped against the gravel as they dragged him toward a decrepit warehouse that loomed ahead. The building seemed to leer at him, its rust-covered metal siding and broken windows making it look like a relic of despair. Faded graffiti and overgrown weeds added to its eerie atmosphere. Malcolm's breath quickened as he scanned the area. There was no one else around, no one to call for help. "Where are you taking me?" he repeated, this time with a sharper edge of desperation in his tone. The suited man removed his sunglasses, revealing cold, calculating eyes. "You ask too many questions, kid," he snapped. "You'll find out soon enough." The men led Malcolm inside the warehouse. The air was thick with the stench of mold and decay, and the dim light from a single flickering bulb cast long, distorted shadows. Malcolm's senses sharpened in the darkness, every creak of the floorboards and drip of water making him flinch. He couldn't tell if the men wanted to intimidate him, harm him, or worse. Through the fog of fear, a small, determined voice in his head whispered, "Stay calm. Think. You're smarter than they think." His pulse steadied as the voice grew louder. Malcolm knew he couldn't rely on anyone else to save him. If he wanted to get out of this alive, he'd have to do it himself. The interior of the warehouse was dimly lit, with beams of sunlight filtering through the cracks in the walls. The air smelled musty, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. Malcolm's captors shoved him into a chair in the center of the room and tied his hands behind his back with rough rope. The rope bit into his skin, but he bit his lip to keep from crying out. The suited man crouched down in front of Malcolm, his face inches away. "Now, here's the deal, kid. You're going to tell us how much money you've made from that little lemonade stand of yours." Malcolm blinked in confusion. "Money? I don't have much, just a few dollars I've been saving from my mom." The man chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Don't play dumb. We know about your story, how everyone's been donating to help your mother. That kind of sympathy brings in big bucks. Now, where's the cash?" Malcolm's heart sank. These men thought he had a fortune saved up. He shook his head. "I swear, I don't have much. It's all back at my stand, and it's not even enough for what my mom needs." The suited man's expression darkened. He stood up and signaled to one of the others. "Search him. He's got to be hiding something." As the men rummaged through Malcolm's pockets and found nothing, he realized he had one advantage. They didn't know just how little he had. If he could stall them long enough, someone might notice he was missing and alert the authorities. "You really think I'd carry a lot of cash on me?" Malcolm said, trying to sound defiant. "If I had that kind of money, I'd already be paying for my mom's treatment." The suited man narrowed his eyes. "Smart mouth for a kid in your position. Maybe we need to teach you some manners." Malcolm's stomach turned as one of the men cracked his knuckles and stepped closer. But just as the man reached for him, Malcolm spoke up, his voice shaky but loud. "Wait, what if I can show you where the money is?" The suited man held up a hand, stopping the brute in his tracks. "Go on." Malcolm took a deep breath, stalling for time. "It's in a bank account, but you'll never get it if something happens to me." The man frowned, clearly trying to decide if Malcolm was bluffing. "Fine," he said after a moment. "You'll take us to it, but if you're lying—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the threat was clear. As they untied him and led him back to the SUV, Malcolm's mind raced. He had no intention of leading these men to anything. He needed to find a way to escape before they realized he was stalling. When they reached the SUV, Malcolm noticed something. The driver had left the keys in the ignition, and one of the back doors wasn't fully closed. It was a small opportunity, but it was all he needed. As the men argued about who would sit where, Malcolm made his move. He shoved the nearest man as hard as he could and bolted for the door. His heart pounded as he sprinted through the trees, the sound of angry shouts and footsteps behind him. "Get back here," one of the men roared. Malcolm ran as fast as his legs could carry him, zigzagging to make it harder for them to follow. He spotted a faint light in the distance, a cabin or maybe another building. He didn't know who was there, but it was his only hope. Bursting through the clearing, he found himself in the yard of a small cabin. An older man stepped out, holding a rifle. "What's going on here?" the man demanded, his voice stern. "Help me," Malcolm gasped, pointing over his shoulder. "They're after me." The kidnappers skidded to a stop at the edge of the yard, realizing the man with the rifle wasn't going to let them pass. The older man fired a warning shot into the air, and the kidnappers scrambled back the way they came. "Come inside," the man said, ushering Malcolm into the safety of the cabin. "You're safe now." Inside the cabin, Malcolm sat on an old, worn-out couch, his body trembling as the adrenaline began to wear off. The older man, who introduced himself as Mr. Harris, handed Malcolm a glass of water. "Take a sip, son. You're safe now," he said, his voice steady but kind. Malcolm took a shaky sip, his mind racing to process everything that had happened. He explained the situation to Mr. Harris in short, hurried sentences, telling him about the men who had kidnapped him and the reason they believed he had money. Mr. Harris nodded solemnly. "You've been through a lot, kid. We're going to set this right. Let me call the authorities." Mr. Harris picked up an old rotary phone and dialed the local sheriff's office. As he spoke to the dispatcher, Malcolm could feel the tension in the room ease slightly. Help was on its way, and he wasn't alone anymore. "They'll be here soon," Mr. Harris said after hanging up. "You did good running away like that. Smart move." Malcolm nodded, still clutching the glass of water. I couldn't let them take me. My mom needs me." Mr. Harris's expression softened. "Sounds like you're a brave young man. Your mom raised you right." 15 minutes later, the sound of sirens filled the night air. Red and blue lights flickered through the trees as several police cars pulled up outside the cabin. Sheriff Wallace, a tall man with a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped out of the lead vehicle. "You the boy who called for help?" he asked, his sharp eyes scanning Malcolm. "Yes, sir." Malcolm said, his voice steady despite the fear still lingering in his chest. "The men who took me, there were 3 of them. They are not far from here." The sheriff nodded and motioned for his deputies. "Fan out and search the area. Keep your radios on. We're bringing these guys in tonight." As the deputies spread out, Sheriff Wallace turned back to Malcolm. "You're safe now, son. We'll get them." Malcolm provided a detailed description of the men and the black SUV they were driving. He even pointed out the direction they had fled. Mr. Harris chimed in, explaining how the kidnappers had retreated when confronted. "You've got guts, kid," the sheriff said, patting Malcolm on the shoulder. "Most people wouldn't have been able to stay as calm as you did." Malcolm shook his head. "I wasn't calm. I was scared out of my mind. But I couldn't let them win. My mom, she depends on me." The sheriff nodded, his respect for the young boy growing. "Well, you're one tough kid. Let's get you back to safety." The deputies moved quickly through the woods, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. It didn't take long for them to find the kidnappers, who had attempted to hide the SUV in the dense foliage. The men put up a fight, but they were no match for the determined deputies. By the time the sun began to rise, all 3 kidnappers were in custody, their hands cuffed behind their backs. The sheriff made sure Malcolm saw them being loaded into the police cars. "They'll never bother you or anyone else again," he assured Malcolm. For the first time since the ordeal began, Malcolm allowed himself to feel relief. The nightmare was over. As Malcolm and Mr. Harris sat on the porch watching the police cars drive away, another vehicle pulled up. A sleek black SUV, but this one wasn't menacing. It was polished, expensive-looking, and seemed out of place in the quiet rural setting. A well-dressed man stepped out, his eyes scanning the scene until they landed on Malcolm. The man's expression softened as he approached. "Are you Malcolm?" he asked, his voice calm and kind. "Yes," Malcolm replied, puzzled. "Who are you?" The man smiled faintly. "My name is Mr. Thomas. I'm here because I heard what happened, and because of your lemonade stand." Malcolm frowned. "My lemonade stand? How do you know about that?" Mr. Thomas crouched slightly to meet Malcolm's eye level, his gaze warm and reassuring. "Your lemonade stand became the talk of the neighborhood, Malcolm. And not just for the lemonade. People noticed your determination, your hard work, and your reason for being out there every day." Malcolm's brow furrowed in confusion. "How do you know all that?" Mr. Thomas smiled. "I'm one of the people who stopped by your stand, though you probably don't remember me. I didn't introduce myself properly, but I heard your story. It struck a chord with me." Malcolm shook his head. "Why would someone like you care about my story? I'm just a kid trying to help my mom." "Exactly," Mr. Thomas replied. "You're a kid with more courage and responsibility than most adults, and it reminded me of someone I used to know, my own mother." Mr. Thomas took a deep breath, his voice softening. "My mom raised me on her own after my father passed away. She worked hard, but there were times when we struggled. I remember her making sacrifices just to keep us fed and housed. Seeing you out there every day brought those memories back." Malcolm's eyes widened slightly. "So you know what it's like." "I do," Mr. Thomas said. "And when I heard about what happened, about those men taking you and how you stood your ground, I knew I had to do something. People like you deserve support, Malcolm." Mr. Harris, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward. "You've got a good heart, Mr. Thomas, but what exactly are you planning to do?" Mr. Thomas turned to Mr. Harris and then back to Malcolm. "First, I want to make sure you and your mom are taken care of. I've already made arrangements to cover her medical bills, including the upcoming treatment she needs." Malcolm's jaw dropped. "You'll pay for her treatment?" Mr. Thomas nodded. "Yes, every penny, but that's not all. I've also arranged for you both to move into a new home, a safe place where you can focus on being a kid, not just a caregiver." Tears welled up in Malcolm's eyes and he struggled to find words. "You're serious? You'd do all that for us?" "Absolutely," Mr. Thomas said firmly. "And one more thing. I've set up a trust fund to ensure you have access to education, health insurance, and anything else you might need in the future. You've earned it, Malcolm. This is my way of saying thank you for reminding me of the values my own mother taught me." Malcolm couldn't hold back his emotions any longer. Tears streamed down his face as he tried to process everything. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice trembling. "You don't need to," Mr. Thomas replied. "Just promise me you'll keep working hard and taking care of your mom. That's thanks enough." Mr. Harris clapped a hand on Malcolm's shoulder. "See, kid? Good things come to those who keep doing the right thing. You've got a bright future ahead of you. For the first time in what felt like forever, Malcolm felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The constant worry about his mother's health, their finances, and his own safety began to fade. He couldn't believe how drastically his life had changed in just a single day. Over the next few weeks, Mr. Thomas's promises were fulfilled. Malcolm's mother received the life-saving treatment she desperately needed, and their new home was everything they had dreamed of. It was modest but comfortable, with a small garden where Malcolm's mother could relax as she recovered. The trust fund ensured Malcolm could focus on his education without worrying about the cost. For the first time, he could dream about a future beyond survival, a future filled with possibilities. One evening, as Malcolm sat on the porch of their new home, he thought about everything that had happened: the kidnapping, the lemonade stand, and Mr. Thomas's unexpected generosity. All of it had shaped his life in ways he couldn't have imagined. He turned to his mother, who was sitting beside him, her health steadily improving. "Mom," he said, "I think Dad was right. He always told me never to beg, but to work hard and believe in myself. And he was right. It all worked out." His mother smiled, her eyes filled with pride. "It did, Malcolm. And that's because of your courage and determination. You've made your father proud." Malcolm nodded, his heart full of gratitude and hope. He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready to face it head-on, knowing he had the strength, the support, and the will to overcome anything. Word about Malcolm's story spread like wildfire. Local news outlets covered the brave boy's journey, from his humble lemonade stand to his harrowing kidnapping ordeal and the miraculous turn of events that followed. His resilience and the community's generosity inspired people far and wide. One day, as Malcolm and his mother were settling into their new life, a knock on the door surprised them. Malcolm opened it to find a group of neighbors and strangers standing outside, holding flowers, gift baskets, and envelopes. Among them was Mrs. Johnson, the elderly woman who had often stopped by his lemonade stand. "We wanted to come by and see how you're doing," Mrs. Johnson said, her smile warm. "You've touched so many lives, Malcolm. People have been inspired by your story, and we wanted to show our support." Malcolm looked at the crowd in awe. "You've already done so much. I don't know what to say." One man in the crowd stepped forward. "You don't need to say anything, son. Just keep being who you are. Your determination has reminded us of what it means to care for each other." People began sharing stories of how Malcolm's efforts had inspired them. A local bakery offered to sponsor a lemonade drive in Malcolm's name, with proceeds going to help other struggling families in the community. A nearby school announced plans to create a scholarship fund for students who demonstrated resilience and leadership, naming it the Malcolm Award. As people spoke, Malcolm felt a mixture of pride and humility. He had never imagined that his small lemonade stand would grow into something so much bigger than himself. He realized that while Mr. Thomas's generosity had given him a new lease on life, the kindness of everyday people had also played a critical role. Later that evening, Malcolm sat with his mother and reflected on the day's events. "Mom," he said, "I think Dad would have loved to see this. He always believed in helping others." She nodded, her voice soft but strong. "Your father would be proud, Malcolm, and so am I." As weeks turned into months, Malcolm's life continued to improve. With his mother's health steadily recovering, he could focus more on his education and dreams for the future. The trust fund set up by Mr. Thomas allowed him to attend a prestigious school, where he quickly became known for his determination and leadership skills. Malcolm also used his platform to advocate for causes close to his heart. He spoke at community events, sharing his story and encouraging others to help those in need. "Even the smallest acts of kindness can make a big difference," he often said, his voice filled with conviction. Years later, Malcolm looked back on his journey with gratitude and pride. His lemonade stand had been a symbol of hope and perseverance, and it remained a cherished memory. He decided to reopen it, not as a business but as a community project. Every weekend, he and his mother would set up the stand in their front yard, donating all proceeds to local charities. The stand became a beacon of hope, attracting families, children, and even tourists who had heard about Malcolm's story. It reminded everyone of the power of resilience, kindness, and community. Malcolm's life was unrecognizable from the struggles of his past. He had a bright future ahead, filled with opportunities and dreams waiting to be realized. But more importantly, he had a deep sense of purpose and the knowledge that even in the darkest moments, Hope could light the way. Sitting with his mother one evening, Malcolm reflected on everything they had overcome. "Mom," he said, "we've been through so much, but I think it all happened for a reason. It's made us stronger." She smiled, her hand resting on his. "It has, Malcolm, and it's shown us that no matter how tough life gets, there's always a way forward." Malcolm's story was a testament to the power of perseverance and the kindness of strangers. It proved that even in the face of adversity, one act of courage could ripple outward, touching countless lives. And while his journey had been filled with challenges, it had also been filled with triumphs that would shape the rest of his life. Malcolm had started with a simple goal: to help his mother. Along the way, he had inspired a community, faced unimaginable dangers, and emerged stronger than ever. And as he looked toward the future, he knew that his story was just beginning. Malcolm's story didn't just end with personal success. It became a powerful symbol of hope for others facing hardships. The media coverage of his journey brought attention to the struggles of countless families dealing with financial and medical challenges. Malcolm, now a young man with a promising future, decided it was his responsibility to pay forward the kindness and support he had received. With Mr. Thomas's guidance, Malcolm started a foundation dedicated to helping families with financial burdens due to medical expenses. The foundation, named the Lemonade Legacy, drew inspiration from Malcolm's lemonade stand. Its mission was simple yet profound: to provide assistance and opportunities to those who needed it most. Malcolm threw himself into the work, using his story to inspire donors and volunteers. He traveled to schools, community centers, and corporate events, sharing his journey and encouraging others to contribute to the cause. "If a 13-year-old with a lemonade stand can make a difference," he would say, "imagine what we can achieve together." Malcolm never forgot his father's advice: never beg, and always strive to find a solution. He incorporated that philosophy into the foundation's programs, focusing on teaching financial literacy, entrepreneurship, and resilience to young people. Workshops were held in underserved communities, where Malcolm shared the lessons he'd learned from his struggles and triumphs. One day, during a workshop, a young boy approached Malcolm with tears in his eyes. "My mom's sick too," the boy said. "I don't know what to do." Malcolm knelt down, meeting the boy's gaze. "You're already doing something," he said gently. "By being here and wanting to help, you've taken the first step, and we're here to help you take the next ones." The foundation quickly gained recognition, attracting partnerships with businesses and local organizations. Mr. Thomas played a significant role, offering advice and using his network to expand the foundation's reach. He often reminded Malcolm of how far he had come. "You turned a lemonade stand into a movement," Mr. Thomas said one evening during a meeting. "Your father would be proud, and so are all of us who've had the privilege to watch you grow." Malcolm smiled, his heart full. "I just hope I'm making a real difference," he said. "You already have," Mr. Thomas replied. To celebrate the foundation's success, Malcolm organized an annual event called the Lemonade Festival. Held in the same park where his lemonade stand had once stood, the festival became a day of joy, unity, and giving back. Families from all over attended, sharing stories of resilience and enjoying activities, food, and, of course, lemonade. The festival's proceeds went directly to helping families in need, ensuring that the spirit of Malcolm's lemonade stand continued to thrive. During the first festival, Malcolm stood on stage, looking out at the crowd of smiling faces. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This all started with a small stand and a big dream, and now it's become something I never imagined. Together, we've proven that no challenge is too great when we stand united." Throughout it all, Malcolm's mother remained his greatest supporter. Her health had improved dramatically, thanks to the advanced treatment she had received. Watching her son achieve so much filled her with pride. One evening, as they sat on their porch, she turned to him and said, "You've done more than I ever dreamed, Malcolm. You've turned our struggles into something beautiful." He took her hand, his voice soft but firm. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. You taught me to fight, to hope, and to believe." As Malcolm's life continued to evolve, he remained grounded by the experiences that had shaped him. He knew the importance of giving back, of staying true to the values his father had instilled in him, and of cherishing the people who had supported him along the way. His story was no longer just about a boy selling lemonade to help his sick mother. It was about the power of resilience, the strength of community, and the extraordinary changes that could come from small acts of courage. And as Malcolm looked ahead, he knew his journey was far from over. There were still challenges to face, lives to change, and dreams to fulfill. But for the first time in his life, he felt fully prepared to take it all on, one step at a time. As the years passed, Malcolm's influence only grew. His story spread far beyond his town, inspiring people across the nation. Schools added his journey to their curriculum to teach students about resilience, kindness, and the power of never giving up. Documentaries and news outlets highlighted his transformation from a boy selling lemonade to a community leader and philanthropist. One day, Malcolm received a letter in the mail with an official government seal. It was an invitation to the Capitol, where he would be awarded a prestigious national honor for his contributions to society. Malcolm, stunned by the recognition, called his mother immediately. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling, "they want to honor me in Washington." His mother laughed through tears. "Of course they do. You've done more good in a few years than most people do in a lifetime." Malcolm stood on stage at the Capitol weeks later, surrounded by officials, dignitaries, and supporters. As he received the award, he gave a heartfelt speech. "This honor isn't just for me," he said. "It's for everyone who believed in me, for every person who lent a helping hand, and for every family struggling to make it through. My story proves that when you combine courage with kindness, you can create miracles." With his newfound platform, Malcolm began mentoring young entrepreneurs who were starting their own businesses with small but mighty dreams. He launched programs to fund micro-businesses, offering grants and free workshops to underprivileged youth. One of his mentees, a 14-year-old girl named Sarah, wanted to start a mobile library in her neighborhood. Malcolm not only guided her through the process, but also used his network to secure funding. Within months, Sarah's mobile library was bringing books to children who had never owned one before. Despite his success, Malcolm never lost touch with the struggles of his past. He visited hospitals where families were facing medical debt, offering support and financial assistance through his foundation. He spoke at community events, encouraging people to come together and lift each other up. But Malcolm also faced criticism from skeptics, who doubted his motives or questioned his ability to sustain his foundation's impact. He handled the negativity with grace, knowing his work spoke for itself. "Criticism is just a sign that you're doing something worth noticing," he told his team. "We'll keep proving them wrong with every life we change." Malcolm's story also brought significant change to his town. With his foundation's efforts and partnerships with local businesses, the community began to thrive. New job opportunities emerged. Healthcare facilities were improved, and a renewed sense of unity filled the streets. The lemonade stand where it all began became a landmark, now run by local kids who were taught Malcolm's values of hard work and generosity. A plaque was placed nearby, reading, "Here stood the humble beginnings of a boy whose determination and kindness changed the world." Years later, Malcolm expanded his efforts globally. He traveled to countries where access to education, healthcare, and basic necessities was scarce. His foundation provided scholarships, built schools, and set up healthcare clinics in remote areas. On one of his trips, he met a young boy who reminded him of himself. The boy was selling water bottles to support his family, and Malcolm saw the same determination in his eyes that had driven him years ago. "You're going to do amazing things," Malcolm told him. "Never stop believing in yourself." As Malcolm returned home from one of his global initiatives, he sat down with his mother, now healthier than ever. Together, they flipped through a photo album filled with memories of their journey. Pictures of the lemonade stand, the awards, the foundation's achievements, and the smiling faces of people they had helped. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" his mother said, her voice filled with pride. Malcolm nodded, his heart full. "We have, Mom, and there's still so much more to do." Malcolm's life became a testament to the power of perseverance, compassion, and the belief that even the smallest actions could lead to monumental change. His journey inspired countless others to take their own first steps toward making a difference, proving that no dream was too big and no obstacle too great. And so, the boy who once sold lemonade to save his mother's life became a symbol of hope for millions, leaving behind a legacy that would inspire generations to come. Years turned into decades, and Malcolm's impact only deepened. His foundation, now a globally recognized organization, continued to expand its reach. What began as a small dream to help his mother grew into an unstoppable movement, touching millions of lives worldwide. Malcolm, now a mentor to future leaders, took pride in seeing others carry forward his vision of resilience and kindness. One of Malcolm's most cherished projects was creating a public park dedicated to his father and mother. The park featured a walking trail, a community garden, and a pavilion where events were held to support local causes. At the park's entrance stood a statue of a young boy holding a pitcher of lemonade, a tribute to where it all began. On opening day, Malcolm addressed a crowd of supporters and families. "This park is not just a tribute to my parents," he said. "It's a reminder that no matter how tough life gets, there's always a way forward. It's a symbol of hope, just like that lemonade stand was for me." As Malcolm grew older, he began preparing for the next generation to take over his foundation. He launched a fellowship program to train young leaders from diverse backgrounds, ensuring that the mission of uplifting communities would continue long after his time. One of these fellows was a young man named Terrence, whose story mirrored Malcolm's own. Terrence had grown up in poverty, but dreamed of creating educational opportunities for underprivileged children. Under Malcolm's guidance, Terrence launched a program that provided free tutoring and mentorship to students in struggling neighborhoods. Watching Terrence's progress, Malcolm felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. He realized that his journey had come full circle. Just as strangers had once helped him, he was now empowering others to create their own ripple effects of change. Malcolm's town became a beacon of inspiration for the world. Its transformation was a living example of what could happen when a community rallied together for a common purpose. Businesses flourished, schools improved, and healthcare became accessible to all. Every summer, the town held an annual Lemonade Festival to celebrate Malcolm's legacy. Families set up lemonade stands, with all proceeds going to charitable causes. Malcolm, despite his busy schedule, always made time to attend. He'd walk through the festival, chatting with children selling lemonade and sharing words of encouragement. "You're doing great," he'd tell them. "It all starts with small steps." In his later years, Malcolm often reflected on his life's journey. Sitting on the porch of his spacious home, he would gaze at the sunset, thinking about how far he had come. He remembered the hardships, the heartbreak, and the moments when he felt like giving up. But most of all, he remembered the love and strength of his mother, who had been his guiding light through it all. One evening, as he sat with his grandchildren, they asked him about the lemonade stand. "Grandpa," one of them said, "is it true you started everything with just a pitcher of lemonade?" Malcolm chuckled. "It's true," he said, "but it wasn't about the lemonade. It was about believing that even when life knocks you down, you can always get back up. And when you help others along the way, you'll find that the world has a way of helping you too." Malcolm's story became a timeless tale of courage, compassion, and the power of hope. Schools, libraries, and community centers across the globe shared his journey, inspiring people to dream bigger and never give up. Even after Malcolm's passing, his legacy lived on through the countless lives he had touched. His foundation continued its work, led by the people he had mentored. The park, the festival, and the statue of the boy with the lemonade pitcher became symbols of what was possible when one person refused to let adversity define their future. And so, the boy who once sold lemonade to save his mother's life left behind a legacy that would inspire generations to come. A legacy built on love, determination, and the unwavering belief that even the smallest acts of kindness could change the world. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.